Let's talk a little bit about tonality. In the previous video that I did, which you can check up here somewhere, the notion of tonality was being hinted at without actually being expressed. And I did that on purpose because you don't need more things to overwhelm you all at once. But I think it's important to begin a light discussion on this idea of tonality in music, and you may have heard that term before. Think of it like if you're looking at a painting, you might get the impression, just an overall impression from the painting, that the way the colors are used, the way the light is used, that the mood of the painting is rather happy. It makes you feel good. Compare that to another painting where the color scheme that was chosen and the lighting and all those other same features make you feel introspective or sad or melancholy. Mood, in terms of those paintings, has an equivalent feature in music, and we call that mood a tonality, with reference to sometimes what's the key of the piece. And in general, very general terms, a sad piece of music would be expressed most commonly using a minor key, and a happy-ish tune might be in a major key as a result. Sorry about that email coming in. Now, even as I say these things to you, there are so many exceptions to this that with every word I'm thinking about expressing, I'm going, oh, in my mind, I'm going, oh, but wait, there's that exception. And so this is going to go on. But for our purpose, for this video series, I think we can sort of disregard the immense complexities that surround tonality. And if you're doubting how complex this could be, I would invite you to go and check out on YouTube the YouTuber 12 Tone. He has a wonderful sort of artistic walkthrough of the density with which tonality can be used or expressed or argued over. It's all there if you want to dive in and explore it. But his video on rethinking tonality, I'll leave a link in the notes below. Go check that out. If you just want to have some fun, don't try to understand it all. Just have some fun exploring how much people in music debate tonality. And if you're into that, you might enjoy the video. In a very general sense, tonality simply refers to the sense that the piece of music you're listening to revolves around a certain tone. And, you know, in the previous video, I explored that with bringing C major and A minor thinking together so that I would have a pool of notes available to me to improvise a little bit over the backing track that was used. So if you haven't seen that video, go check it out. Press the I button up here and go check it out. Get a head start on that, because what I'm going to talk about today may not make sense to you if you haven't gone through that video at least. In its simplest form, Here I go saying, oh yeah, I can't always say that because there are exceptions, but in its simplest form, we can assume that the chord that ends a song can be interpreted as the tonality of the song. So for example, if a song ended in A minor, in all likelihood, the overall tonality of the piece was probably captured using A minor. If the song ended in C major, we can assume that as well, that the overall tonality of the tune was major in C, or happy, whereas in the A minor key, the sound of the tune had a more sad quality to it. And again, that's a very broad generalization. Sometimes the chord you start on in the song can help define the tonality. Other times it's more reliable to go to the last chord. But it's not always clear cut, which is why this is a bit of a difficult discussion, because every word that I'm using, I can go, oh wait, now there's an exception to that. But let me give it to you in the most simplest term. I'll just bring my guitar out here. I don't know where I heard this story, but I found it really funny, and it made a lot of sense to me. So apparently the story goes something like, two people living in an apartment building, one above the other on a different floor, but just beneath one another. And the person down at the lower level kept hearing the musician practicing in the upper level. The sound would go through the ceiling or something like that. Happens in my house, happens in other people's homes. And the musician living above was doing this a lot. And repeat. And over and over and over, that musician was practicing 7 notes of that major scale. This happens to be C major. But the person down below who kept hearing this was starting to get very, very agitated. So much so that that person ran upstairs, knocked on the musician's door, musician answers, that person runs into the room and goes playing it on the piano. So here was the guy upstairs going, and the guy down below couldn't stand it because it wasn't completed. Or at least the person down below felt it should be resolved. Stop stopping where you're stopping, Mr. Musician. And so what he was looking for was this sound. That, in a sense, is tonality. If you're listening to that sound and you feel somewhere inside of you that there should be a final note that gives it completion, that gives it definition, it just feels resolved, then you're sensing tonality. It made sense to me right away. I mean, if you've been involved in music for any length of time, these things do creep up. And so in this case, it was defining tonality around the note C. And all the other notes in the scale, in a way, in a very general way, C becomes the most important note. Some people call it the root note. The root note refers more to the note of a chord that is the basis of the chord for me. This, to me, is the tonic note. It's the tone, the thing that sets the tone. So we call it the tonic note. So C is the most important, and then all the other notes fall toward the C in various degrees of importance. We don't need to get into that today. We just need to think about C being the most important in this case. Now, listen again carefully to the C major scale. And of course, I could have done it on one string like I've been doing for a while. And then resolve it. If you have that sense of needing that resolution going on in your mind, and it's a very subtle thing, then you have some awareness of tonality. If I did the same thing in A minor, and remember, A minor shares the same notes, the natural minor shares the same notes as C major. And that raises another question I'm going to address in a moment. But here's A minor just played on as its scale. Now that has a distinctly different sound from C major. A minor. If I play the C major scale against the C chord, I think you'll understand the connection a bit here. So I'll play the scale first, then the chord. I hope you can sense that there's a crossover, there's a similarity between the two. Let's do the same thing with A minor. A minor, now C. It's that kind of quality between the notes that perhaps are getting played and the chord, or the harmony in the background and how they're relating. It all contributes to your awareness of tonality. And of course, for those of you that are perhaps more theoretically trained, tonality can relate directly to the key that you might be in. Is it the key of B minor, the key of D flat major? And that raises an interesting point because, as you probably know, classical musicians, when they write their compositions, do tend to include the key that the composition as a whole includes. So for example, you can think of the Sixth Symphony by Beethoven, which is often referenced as the Pastoral, very beautiful symphony. In F, it'll say that right at the front of the composition. Or Dvorak's New World Symphony, which is written in key of E minor. So you'll see Symphony number 9 in E minor by Antonin Dvorak. So the classical people kind of have a head start, in a way, of understanding tonality, because a lot of pieces get presented to them in the title with the key. And don't worry if you're not understanding what I mean by key right now. I just want you to kind of follow me down this path for a little bit. That their music is being given to you with information that says this is the overall tonality of it. So for Dvorak's symphony, because it's a minor key, you might get the impression as you listen to it, and hopefully so, that there's a reflective, not a sad quality to it, and not melancholy, but it's contentment at a quiet level, and hence the minor key tends to reflect that better than a major key would. Opposite effect going on in Beethoven's symphony, which is in F major. That gives you the impression that the overall mood of the piece is kind of more up. Not in tempo, just up in emotional content. It's not trying to be overly reflective or melancholy or anything like that. And I have to be cautious when I'm reflecting on these references to keys, because generally speaking, people will tell you a minor key tends to be a sad key and a major key tends to be a happy key. That's really, really general. It's not always the case. And again, this is where the discussions and the debates around tonality go on forever. Again, referencing the 12-tone video on YouTube, go and listen to that if you really want to get a sense of how much discussion goes on around it and how vague this concept can be. But for us, I'm trying to make it clear. Yes, we will use the notion that minor keys tend to be sad in their sound, and or some emotion around that sad quality, and major keys tend to be more uplifting, happy, heroic, whatever, something big and full of positive energy, so to speak. And it's interesting to me that while the old classical people did that with their written music, we don't tend to do that with our songs in modern music. For example, you don't hear wagon wheel being said to you or titled as wagon wheel in, what key is it in? G major. Wagon wheel in G. Or you don't hear it when the Eagles are playing Hotel California. You don't hear them presenting it as Hotel California in B minor, even though it's basically in the key of B minor. They don't say it that way. And so I think to some extent, for us guitarists who are generally, popular style musicians, we're losing out learning how to get a sense of the overall tonality of a piece. But here's my main point. Having said all that, that's heavy already, is that in the previous videos, I started with C major, video 1, then I transitioned to C major's relative minor, which is A minor, that was video 2, and in video 3, I wanted to demonstrate that if you had a knowledge of that relationship and the notes that are shared between the two keys, which are identical, the first question that most students ask of me is, well, if the notes are the same, what's the difference between these two scales, C major or A minor? Well, at one level you can hear it. I hope you can hear it. C major kind of has a happy, light quality to it. A minor, if you had to put an emotion as a descriptor to each of those, maybe you'd say something like the C major sounds happy and the A minor sounds sad, and yet they're using exactly the same notes. It's for that reason that your awareness of tonality becomes an important feature if you're deciding that you'd like to throw in some notes between chords, which is a bit of the discussion that I had in the previous video, but certainly just having a pool of notes available to you to improvise over a song that might be in the key of C, or in the tonality of C, that even if you were thinking about those notes from an A minor point of view, they're all useful. But you might want to emphasize the C note more frequently to give the listener a sense that that's the environment you're sitting in. That's the painting you're in. You're in the happy painting. And you could do the reverse. If you were thinking of playing or improvising in A minor, but you also know that C major has the same notes, it's really just the same thing turned around a little bit, you can focus your soloing using C major, but try to emphasize the A notes more frequently to give the impression that you're aware that you're in the A minor painting, the sadder, darker painting. I hope that makes sense to you, what I'm trying to articulate, which is a bit of a challenge, I'll have to admit. So tonality is going to become a feature that will explain why two scales that share the same notes, why you can differentiate them. The simple answer is they sound different because you're starting on a different note. And that difference happens to reflect, in the case of the previous videos, that difference is the difference between a happy sound, major, and a minor sound, sad. So if you're used to already playing this guy, our classic A minor pentatonic scale, if you started the very same scale, instead of starting on A, you started on the C note. Why? Because you already know that C major and A minor share the same notes. Same is true in the pentatonic world. You are therefore playing, while you're playing A minor pentatonic, simultaneously you're actually playing C major pentatonic as well. You may not have ever thought about that. So, if you have a major key that you can play in, that you need to solo in, you could draw on some of your pentatonic knowledge in the minor way of thinking and just reapply it to the major way of thinking, because both are being done within the same cluster of notes. I know that's a bit confusing to you right now. The purpose of this video is not to clarify this concept for you, is to get you to think about the fact that we're going to have to think about it as we progress down through other topics. It's going to keep coming up. And the more you get exposure to this way of thinking, hopefully you'll get some aha moments in your thinking about how sound is connected to mood. I mean, I know you know that, but I'm not convinced that everybody who plays is aware of the mood that they're playing is producing, if you get my drift. They can physically, mechanically do everything to play it, whatever the song may be, but they're not necessarily thinking about the overall tonality that they're in. Am I producing a sad type of song or a happy type of song? And that's really a crude separation right there. But I will suggest that you need to start trying to think about that, because that's going to influence the pool of notes that might be available to you to do your solos in, or double stop material, 2 notes at a time, how to choose that stuff, it's all going to reflect the tonality that you're in one way or another. So as I finish this video up, I'm thinking, well, I'm not very convinced that I convinced anybody of anything, other than, hey, Steve talked about this weird thing called tonality. Think of it just as, okay, I did it, there's the video, you can reference it if you want to. There's nothing to work on from this video, but there might be stuff you need to start thinking about as we progress down through this series. Tonality matters until it doesn't. In a lot of very, very contemporary music, there are people who go out of their way to get rid of tonality. They just don't like it. The atonal sound. But most of the music that most people tend to want to play most of the time is still tonally centered. That's why we dance to it. That's why we go on dates with music that makes us feel good while we're on the date. It's all tonal music. It's still a big part of our musical experience. And so I'm going to try to get you to start thinking about this more and more as we discuss more musical stuff. That's all I have for you today. Check out 12 Tone's video on rethinking tonality. It'll give you a sense of how truly complicated and weird it is. In a true sense, songs that are in major keys tend to be happy-ish types of songs, and songs that are in minor keys tend to be sad. And again, that's just scraping the surface. Yeah, so I don't know that I made much sense in my attempt to discuss this with you. If you have some insight yourself on the whole notion of tonal awareness, I would invite you to please leave a comment below and help us all get a really nice big picture of how tonality works. Suffice to say that it's an attempt to provide some structure to music in a predictable way. So in that sense, tonality is kind of like reading a blueprint for a building that is about to be constructed. We need some kind of a plan most of the time in order to build that thing. So tonality could be the blueprint, if you want to think of it that way. And another way of thinking about it is in terms of the actual scale. Let's use the C major scale. Think of the C note as the center of our solar system, just like the sun. So that's the C note. And all the other notes, E, F, G, A, B, and D, are all, that's my dog barking about something, are all circular, moving around the C note, and all of them are being drawn to it in some form or another by the gravity of the sun. So there's an organizational quality to tonality that helps you make sense of music. Okay, I said it was going to be a short video, but it wasn't. So I hope that serves as a little bit of an introduction to tonality for you. It's going to creep up time and time again. So once again, I just wanted to give you a very general sense of what it's about. Some of you may be perceiving it just quite naturally when you hear a piece of music. Others, it may not have ever even occurred to you that there's such a terminology that helps provide some organizational structure to music. But there we have it. Until we meet again, Steve from GuitarEvolutions.com. Thanks for hanging out with me on this convoluted little monologue on tonality. See you next time. Bye.